Why did so many medieval soldiers die from disease, not battle? Life in the Middle Ages was shaped by war, but the biggest killer was not the sword or the arrow. Crowded camps, dirty water, spoiled food, and poor medical knowledge created the perfect breeding ground for illness. Armies marching across Europe became moving carriers of plague, fever, and dysentery. Knights and common soldiers alike discovered that the true danger of medieval warfare was not always on the battlefield, but in the filth and sickness that followed them wherever they went. Number 1. Disease as the real enemy. Medieval warfare looked dramatic on the field, but most medieval soldiers lost their lives in camp long before the charge. Crowded encampments packed thousands of men, animals, and wagons into tight spaces where latrines were shallow or badly placed, runoff mixed with drinking water, and washing was rare. In that environment, fecal contamination seeded dysentery, the bloody flux that dehydrated men in days. Lice and fleas thrived in shared bedding and unwashed clothing, spreading louse-borne fevers and, when rats were present, plague. Food was basic and often spoiled. Salted meat and hard bread kept men moving, but vitamin shortages and bad grain weakened immunity. Long marches, wet boots, poor sleep, and stress made minor coughs turn into chest infections. Medical knowledge offered little help. Most healers still trusted miasma theory and humoral balance, so treatments like bleeding and purging robbed already weak bodies of strength, and barber surgeons reused tools without sterilization, passing infection from wound to wound. Water discipline and waste control were rarely enforced systematically, and only late medieval military manuals began to mention rudimentary camp hygiene. Sieges were worse. Defenders crowded behind walls with stagnant wells and smoky halls. Attackers stood knee-deep in churned mud, fouled by men and horses. Famous campaigns show the pattern clearly. At Harfleur in 1415, disease raced through Henry the Farm's besieging army. Even high-status figures died. During the Third Crusade, illness repeatedly crippled forces around Acre and forced adjustments in plans despite tactical successes. The Black Death magnified all of this, turning armies into fast-moving carriers of epidemic disease across regions. Commanders learned to plan for attrition from sickness as much as for battle losses, because camps functioned like temporary cities without the infrastructure real towns slowly developed: cleaner water sources, quarantine rules, or regulated waste disposal. Most deaths, then, were not from arrows or swords, but from predictable chains. Contaminated water leads to gut infections. Parasites transmit fever. Malnutrition and exposure make recovery unlikely. And misguided cures accelerate decline. Where we picture banners and cavalry, the decisive factors were latrine placement, drainage, cooking lines, and the simple habit of boiling water measures that would only become standard centuries later. In short, the medieval army's greatest enemy walked quietly through tents at night, not across the field at dawn. Number 2. How camp life made things worse. In a medieval army, everyday life was brutal and full of hidden dangers. Food was plain and often spoiled. Men ate hard bread, salted meat, and dried legumes because fresh supplies couldn't stay good on the march. Rotten meat or moldy grain caused stomach illnesses, weakening men from the inside. On top of that, long days marching, lack of rest, exposure to cold or heat, all of it sapped strength. In tents or makeshift barns, Middle Ages soldiers slept packed tight, sharing bedding, clothes, and air. If one man had a cough or fever, it didn't take long for it to spread through ranks. Animals added to the misery. Horses, oxen, and pack animals left dung everywhere, attracting rats. Fleas lived on those rats, and fleas could carry plague. This same plague later caused the Black Death, which devastated entire regions, and armies weren't spared. Movement of armies carried disease across borders faster than merchants or pilgrims. Camp hygiene was nearly non-existent. Latrines were dug too close to living or cooking areas. Waste sometimes seeped into wells or streams. Dirty water went into drinking cups. Soap was rare, washing was minimal, and clothes stayed dirty. Parasites like lice had free reign. Lice bites spread typhus, a deadly fever in crowded, unhygienic conditions. Wounds or small cuts from daily tasks got infected easily, With no disinfectants, infection might turn fatal. Malnutrition, stress, fatigue, and exposure all made soldiers' immune systems weak. Diseases that might chill or weaken a healthy man became killers in the camp. The camp was a pressure cooker of weakness, filth, and disease. Some military manuals tried to address this. They warned against placing camps in marshy land or near stagnant water, and advised selecting clean water sources. But in practice, armies often ignored or couldn't follow those rules because of supply or terrain difficulties. As a result, camp life magnified every danger, not just fighting the enemy, but fighting decay, filth, and microbes that medieval people barely understood. Number 3. Medicine and superstition. In medieval warfare, disease was a greater enemy than swords, and the way soldiers were treated when they became sick often made survival even less likely. Medical understanding in the Middle Ages was extremely limited. Doctors still relied on the theory of the 4 humors, where health depended on a balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If someone had a fever or stomach problems, physicians tried to rebalance the body with methods like bleeding, purging, or inducing vomiting. These treatments usually made a weak soldier even weaker. Barber surgeons, who often handled wounds on the battlefield, reused the same blades and saws without cleaning them. Infections spread quickly through contaminated instruments, and even a small cut could turn fatal once it became septic. Hospitals that followed armies or existed in towns were not places of healing as we imagine today. They were often overcrowded halls or barns where the sick and wounded were laid side by side. Air circulation was poor, bedding was rarely changed, and waste built up around the beds. Instead of stopping illness, these places became centers of further infection. Many soldiers admitted to such spaces died faster than those left outside. Treatments offered inside were little better than what could be found in camp. Herbal mixtures with limited effect, bleeding, or prayers over the patient. Religion and superstition filled the gaps left by medicine. Many people believed disease came from bad air, known as miasma, or that sickness was sent as punishment for sin. Priests were called to camps to hear confessions and give blessings, and although this gave comfort, it also meant priests unknowingly carried disease between the sick. Soldiers carried charms or small relics, hoping for protection, while commanders sometimes organized processions or prayers to ward off illness. These practices reflected deep faith, but had no effect on bacteria or parasites. Conditions during sieges showed how devastating the lack of real medical knowledge could be. Defenders packed tightly inside castles had limited food, stale water, and smoke-filled halls from cooking fires. Illness spread through every corner, and often entire garrisons collapsed without facing a direct assault. Attackers outside were little better off, sitting for months in muddy fields surrounded by animals and waste. Both sides lost more men to fever and flux than to arrows or catapults. Knight's history usually tells of bravery in armored combat, but these warriors were just as helpless against sickness as the poorest foot soldier. Without clean water, sanitation, or effective treatments, every cough or wound carried the risk of death. The mix of misguided medicine, superstition, and poor camp conditions ensured that medieval armies carried death within their own ranks long before the clash of battle began. This was the reality of war in the Middle Ages. Soldiers feared not only enemy steel, but also the slow, unstoppable spread of disease that their leaders and healers could neither understand nor cure. Number 4. The real numbers of death. When historians dig into medieval campaigns, the scale of loss from disease far exceeds what most imagine. In many accounts, for every soldier killed by enemy weapons, as many as 8 or 9 died from sickness. Armies that left home, numbering in the tens of thousands, returned as hollow shells. Famous battles like Crécy or Agincourt dominate our stories, but behind their glory lay silent attrition. Men felled by fever, dysentery, or plague long before they ever met the enemy. The medieval army was meant to be a force of arms and armor, but it too often became a conduit for epidemic. Mass outbreaks shaped the strategy of commanders. They planned for disease losses as much as for enemy attacks. Family records, muster rolls, and contemporary chronicles show that many who were mustered never survived the campaign. Not in pitched battle, but in the march, the camps, and the sieges. Both knights and common foot soldiers shared the same fate. Their greatest enemy was invisible. Wars in the Middle Ages repeatedly stalled or failed because disease thinned ranks before a clash could occur. The flow of men between regions, along roads and rivers, turned armies into vectors of illness, spreading epidemics into towns and countryside too. Entire regions were